Around the world, governments are increasingly scrutinizing religious organizations, particularly those with controversial practices that may conflict with child protection laws, human rights principles, and social welfare policies. Japan's recent intervention into the Unification Church provides the clearest example of how a political shock can transform the state's posture toward religious organizations more broadly, including minority faiths such as Jehovah's Witnesses. For much of their modern history, Jehovah's Witnesses have presented themselves as a global, tightly organized religious movement that aims to stay out of politics, keep the flock insulated from corruption, and focus on door-to-door preaching and scriptural study. In practice, however, the organization's structure, internal rules, and handling of serious allegations, especially CSA and problematic internal governance, have repeatedly brought it into the sights of courts, regulators, and governments around the world. And over the last decade, that scrutiny has intensified and diversified. There's been formal criminal prosecutions and bans in some countries, civil litigation and large damage awards in others, regulatory investigations into safeguarding and charitable statuses, and political debates about how to balance religious freedom with protection of vulnerable people. And at the same time, recent high-profile actions by governments, most notably Japan's intervention into the Unification Church and follow-on attention to other minority religions, have created an atmosphere in which many countries are less willing to treat organized religion as automatically immune from public accountability. And after the Unification Church controversy in Japan, that country has moved to place groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses under fresh scrutiny. The assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in July 2022 was the catalyst. The killer said he acted in part because of anger over his family's financial losses related to donations to the Unification Church. That revelation triggered intense media and parliamentary scrutiny into the church's fundraising practices and its political linkages. The government launched investigations. The Ministry of Education and Justice examined religious judicial corporations, and ultimately the state sought judicial remedies. And on March 25th, 2025, a Tokyo court ordered the dissolution of the Family Federation of World Peace and Unification, commonly called the Unification Church, after a government request citing coercive fundraising and manipulative practices that had harmed families. And the court's action revoked the group's juridical status, put its tax exemptions in jeopardy, and provoked fierce debates over religious freedom and state overreach. And the case was notable for being one of the rare instances where a Japanese court ordered the dissolution of a religious organization on civil law grounds related to abusive or coercive practice rather than criminal convictions alone. And as I record this, just 2 days ago, South Korean investigators said Thursday that they have requested an arrest warrant for the leader of the Unification Church. And this announcement came a day after they questioned her about allegations that the church bribed the wife of jailed former president and conservative lawmaker. The church leader is the 82-year-old widow of the church's South Korean founder, Sun Myung-moon. She and the church have denied allegations they bribed the former president's wife and the lawmaker. And once the government mobilized investigative resources and public attention toward problematic religious practice, especially practices that could be framed as coercive or abusive, other minority religious groups found themselves in the spotlight. And for Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan, the effect was twofold. First, authorities and some local media began to treat the organization as a subject for review in the same breath as other groups accused of problematic conduct. And this has made the watchtower sit up and take note, because the Japanese branch of Jehovah's Witnesses authorized a study to be done. And this was a preemptive strike by the Jehovah's Witnesses to counteract what might come their way. Now, JT covered this over on the XJW Critical Thinker channel, and I must give him credit for bringing this to light. But I decided to do a deep dive into this report and to expose the discrepancies. The website reads as follows. In January 2024, an independent research team conducted the largest ever quantitative study on Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan. It examines the demographics and religious motivations of Jehovah's Witnesses, their families and approaches to child discipline, their attitudes and social relationships, and their health and well-being. The survey was conducted by 2 co-investigators, and the study design was approved by Pearl IRB, an independent institutional review board. 5 international scholars serving as advisors have reviewed the study design and the research findings. During the 10-day survey period, 7,640 survey submissions were received out of a total of 11,344 eligible participants, resulting in a response rate of 67.3%, which is a good indication that the survey is an accurate representation of Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan. Usual scientific methodology was applied, and 447 submissions were removed because of ineligibility and a lack of reliability. The final sample size of the survey was 7,193. Now let's break this down. The report repeatedly claims independence, yet key facts undermine this assertion. When the study was released in September 2024, it was heralded by its authors as a rigorous and independent investigation into the lives, beliefs, and the well-being of Jehovah's Witnesses across Japan. But a closer look reveals something more troubling. The study was funded, facilitated, and largely shaped by the very organization it proclaimed to study. From participant recruitment to survey design, Jehovah's Witness leaders and representatives played a pivotal role. In other words, this was less an independent sociological investigation and more a public relations rescue mission disguised as science. And on the surface, the study appears credible. It lists principal investigators with PhDs, an academic advisory committee comprising respected scholars, and adherence to ethical protocols. Yet, even the report itself admits key facts that compromise its independence. The Japanese branch and world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses developed the questionnaire together with the research team. The survey was conducted only among baptized, active Jehovah's Witnesses, those least likely to criticize the organization. Elders within the congregations distributed the survey links, creating implicit pressure to respond favorably. The report's own introduction concedes the study was launched to counter very negative media coverage and government scrutiny of Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan. Now, this alone should have set off alarm bells for any academic institution reviewing the project. A study funded, populated, and partially designed by the very group under investigation cannot credibly claim independence. The authors repeatedly tout their use of random cluster sampling and representative methods. In reality, the study excluded voices most likely to provide critical perspectives, because only baptized adults active in ministry were eligible. Those disfellowshipped, disassociated, inactive, or raised in the faith but now estranged, the very groups raising alarm about coercive practices, were systematically silenced by design. Congregation elders served as gatekeepers, forwarding survey links to approved participants, ensuring the respondent pool remained organizationally loyal. Even the so-called data cleaning process raises concerns. Respondents exhibiting socially desirable response patterns were excluded, but given the recruitment methods, the real risk was not overly positive responses, but the systematic exclusion of dissenting ones. The report frames Jehovah's Witnesses as victims of negative media coverage and inflammatory rhetoric. Number two, spiritually fulfilled individuals with strong family bonds and positive life choices. And number three, a misunderstood religious minority facing unjust discrimination. Nowhere does the study grapple with documented cases of CSA by Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide, accusations of shunning and family estrangement raised by countless ex members, the group's history of coercive control, including medical and educational restrictions. Instead, the narrative recasts Jehovah's Witnesses as model citizens suffering unfair persecution, an audacious reversal of reality serving organizational interests. The involvement of Jolene Chu, identified as senior researcher Jehovah's Witnesses, as project consultant, should have disqualified the study from being labeled independent. Moreover, Jehovah's Witnesses headquarters provided member contact information, shaping the sample population. The survey instrument itself was co-written with organizational input. Academic advisors had no direct oversight of recruitment data collection or analysis, key stages where bias could flourish. And according to academic and research institutions worldwide, researchers must avoid conflicts of interest that compromise the integrity of research. Here, the conflict was baked into the project's DNA. So why does this matter? Because the study emerges amid growing scrutiny of high-control religious groups in Japan following the assassination of Shinzo Abe and investigations into the Unification Church. By presenting a sanitized, data-driven portrait of Jehovah's Witness life, the report seeks to influence policymakers considering restrictions on coercive religious practices. It also seeks to counteract testimonies from ex-members describing abuse, shunning, and indoctrination, and to rehabilitate the public image of Jehovah's Witnesses amid global scandals. But data produced under organizational control cannot be separated from the agenda behind it. Far from an independent sociological investigation, the study is better understood as an elaborate public relations exercise. Its funding sources, participant selection, survey design, and narrative framing all point to one conclusion. The Jehovah's Witness organization studied itself through its own members, using its own questions to defend its own reputation. True independence would require third-party researchers controlling every stage of the project, inclusion of ex-members, critics, and neutral voices, full transparency regarding funding methodology and data access. Until then, the study remains a textbook example of how powerful organizations can use the veneer of science to launder their image and discredit legitimate criticism. The international record over the last decade makes clear that democracies are trying to square two competing imperatives here. Protecting vulnerable people, victims of abuse, the coerced, those financially exploited, while defending the core right to religious practice. The Jehovah's Witness organization, because of its size, governance, and a series of historic controversies, has repeatedly become the subject of litigation, regulatory inquiry, and public debate. The Japanese experience with Unification Church shows how a dramatic political shock can broaden governmental appetite for intervention once a state's investigative machinery is engaged. It tends to sweep up other minority religions for review. We've seen that happen with the Australian Royal Commission and the Abuse in Care Royal Commission of Inquiry in New Zealand. The path that preserves both security and liberty must include robust independent investigations when credible allegations arise, transparent standards for charities and religious juridical persons, mandatory reporting rules that leave little room for internal secrecy in the face of criminal conduct, and careful judicial safeguards so states do not use administrative powers to trample belief. At the same time, International bodies and civil society organizations must remain vigilant to ensure that actions taken in the name of accountability do not slide into persecution. The last decade shows that courts and regulators can and will hold religious organizations to account. The form that accountability takes, criminal ban, dissolution, civil redress, or regulatory sanctions, will continue to vary with local legal cultures, political pressures, and public memory. But one lesson is now hard to ignore. Religious liberty is not a shield against duty of care. And where institutional behavior harms others, liberal democracies are increasingly prepared to look inside the walls.